Hey guys, John here with Survival Dispatch, and I got Alan with me here. And so the last couple of hours, Alan and I have just been kind of walking through the woods here. We're in the Appalachian Mountains, and Alan's been showing me around quite a few plants, and just showing me, some of the benefits, what to look for, where to look for plants. And so we grabbed the camera and just started talking about, a couple plants. First of all, as a disclaimer, before you ever use any plants in a medicinal manner, before you eat any plants, make sure you do your research. We're just showing you kind of what to look for as far as things like that. So, make sure you're safe whenever you're, eating wild edibles, pretty much anything. So, we're up here in the mountains, and it's a lot different than Florida as far as plants go. A lot of these plants, as Alan said, you'll find a lot of mountainous areas throughout America. And it's just one of those things where I'm always amazed. Alan knows far more than I do when it comes to plants and things, how much Mother Nature can actually provide if you'll just take the time to, number one, learn, then take the time to look.
Yep.
So what are your tips for people starting to get better at wild edibles and things like that?
Well, really the purpose of this series of plants is to kind of expand your mind and kind of get you to see that there's tons of stuff around us that are food and medicine. Our grocery store and our pharmacy historically has been out here on the land, given to us by the Creator. And so first we want to expand your mind to that possibility. Secondly, realize that it's always going to be regionally specific. When I'm in the desert Southwest, I utilize different plants just by virtue of location. If I'm in the Northwest, there's certain plants that are there, the Northeast, Central America, other countries. So the first thing is study the plants in your area. Start out with just a few basic ones that you can fall back on. And as we talk about these plants, it's really just more of an intro. We could talk on and on about plants, and this is not meant to be an exhaustive study. There's a lot more to this stuff than what we really have the time, and it's really beyond the scope of what we're trying to do today. We just want to expand your mindset a little bit. We always talk about hunting and going out and trap something and think about animals, but plants are a sure bet. I can walk up and I can get this thing, and it's
not going to run away from you.
Not going to run away. I don't have to club it in the head. It's instant satisfaction. It's food and medicine right now. And so that for me is really the beauty of it. And so I just wanted to cover a few of the ones around here that I tend to fall back on a lot for food and medicine and things of that nature. And it's going to come down to time of the year. In the spring and summer, there's more plentiful selection than right now. We're starting to enter into the fall. Things are starting to kind of wind down a little bit. And it also comes down to altitude. Even just 100 feet or so in altitude can make a difference. Of one plant will appear and then it'll disappear depending on where you're at. Even one side of the mountain versus the other side of the mountain. These things have very specific bioregions that they inhabit, and you may find one here and then, go a quarter of the way around the mountain or go down slope 100 feet and not find it.
Same with near water or away from water.
Absolutely, yeah. Proximity to water is definitely another indicator.
Yeah. So, Alan's going to walk you through quite a few different plants that we found while we were out here today. Not getting super sciencey about it, no Latin, no anything like that, real simple. Just so you guys could start to get a taste for what there really is to explore out there, because there's so much. I mean, we could take years to go through it.
Plants itself could be a lifelong study, and really what it is for me is it's a medium to get people to understand that this is our native habitat. Most people come out into the wild and they look around and it's just all green and it's something separate from themselves, but this is your native habitat. You have a right to be here. This is where you were meant to operate. And really that's one thing that comes with this awareness is human beings are the only thing in all of creation that have forgotten how to sustain their own lives in their native habitat. A bear 100 years ago and a bear today are pretty much the same. Right. They just have access to more garbage now. But essentially you can count on bears to do bear stuff. Same with the deer, the snake, the turtle, all the animals. But look at humans over the past 100 years. Are we getting better and stronger, or are we devolving? I think we're in a de-evolutionary spiral. So I want us to kind of start that process of let's look back to the land instead of always looking for equipment. You know, you get that feel good when you buy the new knife or the new gun or the new pack. But at the end of the day, if it's just you thrust out onto the land, what you have in here and what you have in here is what will carry you through.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. What are some tips that you would give somebody with regards to getting started in wild edibles? I mean, well, okay, first of all, you can hop on Amazon and probably get some wild edible books for your region. You know, that's always a great place to start. As a reference guide when you go out, is it the correct, you know, because plants will look similar, you know, from time to time, but have completely different properties to them, I will say.
And even different times of the season. You know, some plants in the spring, if you track their growth all the way and you find them in the winter, they look totally different. So you do need to know what the plant's going to look like year round. But the very first rule is do not ingest, use, touch in any way any plant that you cannot 100% beyond any shadow of a doubt know exactly what you're dealing with and what it's used for, and do your own research for that. You know, I really don't learn from books well. Most of what I've learned from other people, and that's how I learn best. I have to go out and touch it and smell it and all that. There are some good books out there. A lot of people like the Peterson field guides.
That's what I was going to say.
I really don't gravitate toward those books that much because they usually just have this pristine picture of a beautiful specimen, and then the one I find doesn't really look like that, and it's got all this real heady scientific botanical data that is kind of lost on the layperson. You know, if you wanted to do the research and get a frame of reference for all of that stuff, it'd be great to do it. I just have so many other things that I study. I haven't dedicated the time to that. One of the better books I've seen is by, I think his name is Samuel Thayer, T-H-A-Y-E-R. It's Forager's Harvest. And he's written another couple of books, I think. And he kind of writes it to the layperson, and it's all about his experiences and his memories as a child of doing this and that with the plant. And I find that it reads a lot better than the kind of dry technical data. You
know, Latin's good in any language. Oh wait, it's just Latin. Never mind.
Yeah, I don't know about all of that. I had a friend. He said that Latin is a language meant to confuse and hide ignorance, and he was a doctor. So, but yeah, I've got friends that know way more than I do about plants. I'm not really a plant guru. I have in every region I go to, I try to learn a baseline so I can get by. And but I have friends that can tell you the Latin and this and that and all the chemical compounds, and I'm just like, what is it? What do I do with it next? And I try to filter all that information so that I don't have all that excess stuff in my brain. But yeah, certainly, you know, reading is a good thing. But at the end of the day, I want to find somebody, like in any area. I've got a good friend in the Southwest, and when I'm in the desert, I grab him and we go out and hands-on. He tells me this is the deal with this plant, this is what I've used it for, and this is what I know. And I find that I personally retain it better when I do it like that. Not to say that you shouldn't have the books. You should have a couple books on plants, but I really don't have. I probably have 2 books on plants. Everything else is just hands-on. I find works best for me. You know.
So, all right. Well, guys, I hope you enjoy. We're gonna take you along with our walk that we did earlier today. We're gonna look at a bunch of plants and tell you exactly, you know, what you're looking for, what they'll do for you, and how to process them as well on a lot of them, you know. So I hope you guys enjoy this video.
So this plant here is horsemint. This time of year, it really stands out because the leaves kind of turn this whitish color, and so it's a contrast from everything that's around it. You'll notice that the stem of this has 4 distinct corners. It's a square, so that lets us know it's in the mint family. The leaves of this plant contain an oil in them that can be used for insect repellent and also topically applied to anything that is hot. Mint tends to cool things, so if we have something that's inflammation, like tendonitis, let's say, that could be topically applied. Also, you know, we have the ability to, as we mentioned, make an insect repellent out of it. So I'm just going to rub this on my hand and crush the oil out of the leaves, and you'll see a little bit of discoloration happening on the skin. And the scent of this is one of the more strong, really potent mints. So it's almost like a Vicks inhaler if you've ever experienced that really opening of the sinuses. This really works good for that as well. Also, we can harvest this stuff this time of year, and we can take this home just like it is, hang it up and dry it, and then strip the leaves off, and it makes a really nice tea throughout the winter months. So let's say, I'm assuming most of you are preppers, so you know the grid's gone down, there is no more store. While these things are growing, we would be out gathering and putting it away, and that's going to be your warm beverages throughout the winter. So we mentioned square stem. That's going to be one indicator of this plant. You'll also notice the growth pattern in the leaves. There tend to be two leaves growing this way, and then the next set of leaves will be perpendicular to that. These seed heads over time, they become a little more raggedy looking as they are now. And the further along this gets, the more white it tends to get. This particular one is Horsemint, and we're here in southern Appalachia, so it's really prevalent, really strong. I've used it a lot for the upper respiratory stuff, but most often I just use it as a tea. But it is an effective insect repellent if you crush this stuff up and rub it on your skin. And it can also act as a cover scent to help mask some of your human scent if you're out there setting traps and hunting and things of that nature. So it's a good plant to know about. So most all of you are familiar with blackberries, very common. We all know that you can eat the berries, but there's a couple of uses beyond the berry that I want to talk about. The leaves and the roots can be made into a tea for stomach trouble, diarrhea, things of that nature. But also, a lesser known fact is that if you need to make a friction fire, a blackberry is one of the best spindles that you can use for a hand drill. What you're looking for is last year's growth or standing dead growth, and you simply take your knife, find the straightest portion you can where it comes out of the ground, and then just remove those spines and you're good to go. You can make fire. So this plant here, a really beautiful plant. They grow really, really tall. You know, sometimes they look like 10 feet high. You find them a lot along the edges of fields and roadsides and things of that nature. One of the things that is going to draw our eye to it first is all of the leaves will grow out of one spot, known as I call it a whorl, W-H-O-R-L, and then there's a smooth section, and then all the leaves emerge from the same place again. And you see that pattern repeat throughout. Also, these the seed heads on them turn purple at certain times of the year. Sometimes they're more whitish, sometimes more green, but they can be really, really huge and really, really beautiful. So a couple of plant names for this is Joe Pieweed, P-Y-E. Another name for it is gravel root, and also known as Queen of the Meadow. Gravel root is generally a name that I like because it tells you what it's for and what part to use. If you have gravel in your kidney, you use the root and make a tea. So this is a kidney stone medicine. Really hard to mistake it with any other plant. I mean, this thing really stands out. And you can see they're tall and majestic, and it's good to know about because sometimes there is no pharmacy and you have to be your own doctor. This plant here is known as Jewelweed or spotted touch-me-not. One of the most miserable things that can happen to you out in the field is to get a case of poison ivy or to have a lot of bug bites. Anything that itches, you know, can become just demoralizing. So this plant here is basically nature's hydrocortisone cream. If it itches, this will fix it. There's a couple of ways that we could utilize it. You know, one, we could just take the plant itself, crush it up, and rub it on the affected area. Another thing that I like to do in a homesteading or prepping type situation is I like to take this plant, crush it up, stick it in a mason jar, and pour rubbing alcohol over it and just let it sit until it turns dark. And that process could be repeated. So you're making a tincture basically that's meant to be used topically for anything, poison ivy, you know, bug bites, that sort of thing. I've used it on my kids plenty in the summer months when they're eaten up with mosquitoes and all of that. So it only grows in low-lying areas, and if you'll notice, there's water right here. We've got a drainage situation here. So you will only find this plant where there is water. And knowing where plants grow will help us to locate them. So this plant and several others like it, they will only grow with wet feet, so to speak. They'll either be in the water or adjacent to the water. In the high mountains, it'll be a runoff situation where there's a pocket, or it'll be next to a pond or next to a creek or something like that. Generally, they like to be kind of shaded, though they can tolerate some sun. So that kind of gives you an idea of where to look when you need the plant. We'll go ahead and cut into this thing and have a look at it. And we're getting a little bit later in the season, so that's the plant. Later on in the summer, you'll see these flowers start to come on it, and that'll kind of be a visual indicator to help you see it. But you'll notice that it's swollen at these nodes, almost like bamboo. It kind of has these nodes in it. So if we would just take our knife here, just to give you an idea of what the inside looks like, I'm just going to kind of skin that back. You can kind of see that it's the pith on the inside almost looks like an aloe. And though the medicine is present everywhere in the leaves, this is kind of the most concentrated part. And as you touch it, you can see that it's kind of mucilaginous. That's a technical term for like snot. It's got this slime thing going on. And that is really good concentrated medicine to apply to a bug bite or an affected area. And we'll show you more about the tincture later, how you can make your own medicine. And that once it's suspended in alcohol, it doesn't go bad, so it'll keep for a long period of time. But this is where we find it, and that's how we use it. This plant here is wild hydrangea, also known in some circles as seven bark, and it's probably the most important plant that we're going to talk about during this series. Important in that I really don't know of anything like it that can do what it can do, and I want to make as many people aware of this as possible. I myself learned about this plant from Ralph Kisselberg when he was in his 80s, and I believe he's since passed. He had people come from all over the U.S. to be treated for the brown recluse spider bite, and this is the plant that he would turn to. This time of year we find that it has, on the seed heads, it has this really tight, compact, greenish color. And you'll notice also there's a flower that comes out of the side. And if you find just a perfect specimen, there'll be one, we have two there, and there'll be a third one here and a fourth one here, like the four corners. Beautiful plant. You can see the leaves come to a really keen point, and they're serrated, very broad, and they grow in twos, exactly opposite of each other, how they emerge from the stem. So what we're looking for the medicine of this is this outer papery rough bark. We want to remove that. So you can see that papery outer bark just comes right off with very little pressure, very light scraping. We'll take that off. And we get down to this lime colored green. That's the medicine. That's the stuff that we're going to put directly onto the bite site. So as we scrape that off, we can see what's left behind is a whitish color. Okay, so it's that green layer. That's what we're after for our medicine. And it has, if you were able to touch and feel this right now, it's cool and it's kind of mucilaginous, slimy. So you would get yourself about the size of a nickel amount of this inner-green bark, place that directly on the bite site, and then just change it out a couple times a day. And it will reverse all the damage that happens with that brown recluse spider bite, all that necrosis and the falling away of the tissue. It will stop it. I myself have treated several people with this, and I've had great results every single time. It's better than anything that modern medicine is going to do for you. So I encourage you to learn this plant, know about it if it's in your area. If it isn't, one thing that you can do is you can find someone who does have it in their area, and you can take this and freeze it, and then it can be preserved for later use. One thing about this medicine though, when it dries, it dies. So you want to keep it moist. You want to take the plant, prepare it, put it in the freezer, or go get it fresh and put it on. But once it's dried out, it's not going to be as effective as if you would get it directly from the plant. This tree that we have here is sweet birch, and we can identify it because the leaves are going to grow in pairs of 2. You can kind of see that pattern repeating. There'll be 2 on this side, and then you'll move up a little bit. There'll be 2 on this side, move up a little bit, 2 on the opposite side. And as you get out to your newer growth, you'll notice that the new growth of the bark almost has a sheen to it, and there'll be little white dots on there. And you can't fully appreciate this plant as far as the smell that it has, but if you scrape the bark, and oh, such an aromatic bouquet on that. It's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like root beer, if you had to liken it to a thing. It's got that sweet smell, hence the name Sweet Birch. So most of your birches are good in that the bark of the more fully grown trees tend to be really good for tinder, for fire making purposes. All of the barks generally, you can cook them down, and an oil, or if you're from the north, oil will come out of this that can be used for lots and lots of stuff. It can be used as a fuel that you burn. It can be applied to the skin topically. Also, we can use a tea of this bark for knocking down a fever, to help you break that fever. So it's a really good tree to know about, as with a lot of the other birches. Some of the old timers in this area would just chew on the end of it and use that frayed end for oral hygiene to clean their teeth with. So it's a really neat tree to know about, and it's one that we have in this area. This plant here is Pip Sisera. It's one of the best cures for any type of UTI or kidney stone. I've treated members of my family with this, and many friends, all with great success. I'm not sure what language Pip Sisera is, but one of my old teachers told me that it literally translated meant breaks apart the stone. What we were looking for here is the leaves, and we would make a tea from those leaves. If it's dried, you know, usually a spoonful, like a tablespoonful, would be sufficient for a tea. If it's green, you know, you might triple that. I just generally go by color. I don't really have a formula for how much of it I use. I'll just kind of steep the leaves and simmer them until it gets that really dark tannic tea type color, and then it's good. It generally likes to grow in areas like this where we have deciduous trees and pine trees. Sometimes you'll find it in pine thickets. It doesn't like full sun, and it's usually around a lot of litter. You can see all of this. There's a lot of deadfall in and around this, and it seems to like those types of areas. And you'll find it also with a little seed head that sticks up with something the size of a peppercorn on top of it. Very distinct leaf, very bright down the middle, and deep color. And they generally don't get much larger than this. That's about as big as they get as a rule. So Pip Sisera, kidney stone medicine. Okay, so like we mentioned before, knowing where a plant lives is going to help you find that plant. And in this case, we're after yellow root. And yellow root will only grow right on the water. It likes to be really close to the water. And so we look down, and here's yellow root. So I'm going to cut a little sample of this just to give you an idea of the plant, and then we left the root in there so it can pop back out. But there's no shortage of it. There's piles of it. So I don't know why they would want to name it yellow root. Sometimes people can be tricky. But you can see very vibrant color yellow. This is some of the most god-awful, nasty tasting stuff I've ever had in my life. But like most medicine, if it tastes really horrible, it's probably good for you. So what yellow root does is it's good for our gastrointestinal area, our stomach and things like that. So you can just chew this stuff to get some relief from your stomach, or you could boil this into a tea, or you could also make it into a tincture. What we've got here is a tulip poplar, but it's actually technically, I believe, a magnolia tree, but a lot of people in this area will refer to it as a tulip poplar. I assume that's because of the tulip shape of the leaf, but it's a really useful tree to know about in this area. A lot of the dugout canoes that the First Nations people made were made from this wood. They would fell the tree and then hollow it out and shape it, and it made a really good canoe. You can also take a coal and burn a chasm into the wood and use it as a bowl or a cup or a vessel for stone boiling. That's where you heat stones into the water, kind of an indirect heat instead of placing a metal pot on a flame. It's known as stone boiling. It's a way that you could purify water. I also use this type of tree for a hearth when I'm making a hand drill fire. Say if I use mullein or blackberry for a hand drill, I like this for a hearth. The inner bark can also be used as a tinder and also be made into rope. And this small sapling here, we're on the side of a logging road that's probably going to be cleaned out. So we'll pull a strip off of this thing and kind of show you the characteristics of the inner and outer bark when taken together. And I'm just going to take a strip like so. And this will not kill the tree when you take it in this fashion, because we're not girdling, we're not going all the way around the tree. So you can see that the bark is very pliable. The first basket that I ever made was made out of this material. So you see that stuff is really, really pliable. So if we were to have a lot of these trees or have some larger trees, we could go around and collect the desired length, and then you just simply weave these strips in and out in a checker type fashion, and you can make containers. You can also strip it down even finer, maybe half or more of what this piece is, and you can have some impromptu cordage instead of having to actually twist fibers to make a piece of rope. This is much quicker if you just want a hasty way to tie or secure something. See how that'll take a knot and not break. It's very, very pliable. So we've got containers, we've got cordage, we've got basketry, friction fire, and tinder, and even vessels and containers, canoes, and so forth out of this one tree. The bark can even be removed in certain times of year when the sap is running, and you can make an actual container just by folding and stitching that back together. So it's a really useful tree, and as with all these plants, you know, do some study, do some research, and learn how you can utilize it. So here is a larger example of a tulip poplar. This one has naturally fallen over, and you can see down here some of the fibers are already exposed. I mean, this stuff is already wanting to be tender. You can just see how that stuff pulls loose. Really, really hair-like, fibrous, really, really dry. So one way we can get at this stuff, let's say it's raining and this bark is going to want to slip a little bit, is we can go ahead and take our knife and come in and we'll just make a line, and we're going to withdraw a section of that bark. And you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with natural fibers that we find them at various stages of decomposition. So here this stuff kind of has a chocolatey appearance to it. And right away what that color tells me is that this is going to be okay for tinder, but it's not going to be really great for cord because it's a little too far gone to have that strength that I'm looking for. This is moist because it's underneath the tree, but you can see how this stuff will just separate out. And we're always on the lookout for tinder when we're in the woods. You know, at no point would I pass up tinder. When I find a situation where I can get some, like right now this stuff is too wet to use. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to process it, lay it out in the sun, go ahead and let this stuff dry, and then I'll have it for my next fire. You know, it's a saying that I tell my students a lot, is always be ready for your next fire. So that's a pretty decent texture. Not strong enough for rope, I can tell that right off. But if we lay this stuff out, see, this is the wet version. This stuff here, because it's been exposed to the light, this is what it would look like. So there's actually enough dry that already exists on this thing that I could probably just kind of come in here and work on some of that. And the longer the pieces that we take, the better. So that when we separate them, we're just going to basically pull them apart. That's just going to help that nest that I'm going to make kind of want to cling together. So first we'll separate them, and then it helps to kind of abrade them either against themselves, up against the side of a tree, a stone, something like that. So you see how it starts to get fuzzy. We want that hair-like consistency. What that's going to do is that's going to expose more surface area so that the flames or the sparks or the coal or whatever ignition source we're using can find a place to start that combustion process. So with all this loose stuff, I could just wipe my hand like this and I can gather it that way, add that to the pile. You know, I might even come in with my blade and scrape and see what could be brought up. There's a nice little bit. And I'm always going to put my drier, more fine stuff to the inside. You can see that stuff's just ready right now. That would take a spark or a coal as it is. I wouldn't have to really do anything to that. So the drier stuff, you know, I may keep in one pocket. This wet stuff, sure, I'll take it. I'm not going to use it now, but I might use it later. And I may be in a situation where I just don't have the access to tinder. So even if it's wet, even if it's not optimal, never pass up an opportunity to get tinder. Like we've talked about before with food procurement, going out to hunt something may or may not happen. One sure bet is plant kingdom, especially in the wintertime. Here in the mountains, the white pine tree is one of my go-tos. It's absolute guaranteed food. So the way we're going to go about this, the inner bark, we're just going to cut out a section roughly the size of a strip of bacon. Of course, that's some funky shaped bacon. I can hear you now, but I shop at the dollar store, so you know, that's how it is. So we're just going to peel that part right there. You can see this white color. So if we take this outer portion of the bark off, what we're left with is this white inner bark. So that doesn't take a lot of time and it doesn't take a lot of energy, and it's a sure bet. Hand to mouth food, doesn't require cooking or any of that. Tastes like Christmas. Yeah, it tastes like a pine tree. Once you cook this stuff though, I have roasted it on hot stones. I have shredded it really fine and boiled it up and added it to soups and stews and things like that. And it changes the flavor, especially when you roast it, it gets kind of crisp, takes on more of a nutty flavor. But hand to mouth survival, this could even be done with a stone. It will keep you going, especially in the wintertime. So inside this bark we have protein. There's some carbohydrates in there. There's phosphorus, some B vitamins, some starches and sugars. So you can actually look up the composition of inner white pine bark and it's pretty amazing. It's a nutritional powerhouse. And then when we look at the needles, a bundle of these needles on a white pine has 5 needles. If we isolate that, you can see that there are 5 needles in that bundle. So it has the same amount of fingers that you do. Now inside the needles we find vitamins A and C, and the best way to get these is to make a tea. We want to avoid boiling the tea. We want to rather steep the tea, because past a certain temperature and you'll kill those vitamins off. So you have food and you have tea all out of this tree. And in the wintertime, your body needs something to produce heat off of. It needs some caloric intake. And I know it may not seem like much, but I've been in situations where I'm truly, for lack of a better term, starving. And when you eat something, no matter how small, you will feel your body immediately utilize those nutrients. So when you harvest your bark, you want to harvest it in this fashion. If you do what's known as girdling the tree and remove the bark from all the way around, you effectively kill the circulatory system so that the tree can't have any type of blood flow from the earth up to the limbs. So taking this thin strip, this will in time heal over, and it's still able to circulate in these other areas. There was a tree in an area where I used to do lots and lots of classes. It was a smaller tree that was destined to be cut down, so I didn't experiment with it, and I had over 30 cuts over the course of a few years out of that one tree, and they all healed over. You could see them over time, how they were healing and coming back. The tree was fine. So just when you do harvest the bark, if you do it in this fashion, you don't have to worry about killing the tree. Now I will add as a side note, if you're in an evasion situation, this is sign, right, that somebody's been here and probably needed something to eat to a tracker. So what we would do is find a slightly larger pine and then pull down the limb and harvest from the top, the sky side of the limb, and then let that limb stand up so that when the trackers come through, they don't see anything like this. Just a little side note, if you happen to be in that mode, if we've got military personnel that are watching this, just a thought for you guys. Also, as a medicine, you can steep this in tea for about 20 minutes and you have an expectorant, something that will help you cough up things. Also, topically, it has first aid applications. So again, do some reading about pine trees. They can really be a game changer out there in the woods. So here we have two plants side by side that are useful. This plant, a lot of people will look at it at a glance and mistakenly call it clover, but if you notice, it has a heart-shaped leaf. It's also generally smaller and a more pale shade of green than clover. It also doesn't have that white arrowhead that clover tends to have. This is called Oxalis, and some people call it wood sorrel. It kind of tastes lemony, very high in vitamin C. It's a great just kind of hand-to-mouth food. I'll pass some to the camera guy. Tell me how awesome that is. All right, we got to see the behind the scenes, man. Taking it about lemony.
Definitely lemony.
Good stuff, huh? Mm-hmm. There you have it. Don't just take my opinion for it. So the other plant we have, along with some yellow jacket action, go away, is, now there's a lot of different types of burdock. You've got curly dock, yellow dock, this dock, that dock. For our purposes, we're not going to get wrapped around the axle. We're just going to collectively call it all burdock, okay? You can see why they might want to call it curly, because of the characteristic of the edge of the leaf. That's kind of what you're looking at. So do some research. Pull up burdock, yellow dock, curly dock. You'll also see, I think the Latin for it is Rumex crispus. That's one of the Latin ones I do know, I guess because crispus kind of reminds me of potato chips or something. But anyhow, one thing that I really like about this is the root. The root of this plant has some starches and some carbohydrates, and if you've ever done any primitive living, you will know that's one of the very hardest things to come across is a source of carbs. And it's something you really, really need, especially if you're accustomed to having those, if you're not already eating a paleo diet, which clearly I'm not. You do go through that ketogenic shock and you hit a wall and you just like, God, somebody give me a spoonful of something to kind of restart the engine. So we'll dig that up and add it as an addition to our stew, maybe. Maybe we'll dig it up. We may have to blast it. So there's a little example of a portion of the root. And so to clean that dirt off, I'm just going to use the edge of that E-tool there. It can be eaten raw, but you're not going to like it. It's kind of like a radish from Chernobyl that was sent to hell to marinate for a while. But after you cook it, it does change and becomes a little more pleasant. So just for fun, we'll take this with us and add it to our stew later. Put that little guy in my pocket. This plant here is poke salad. Sometimes it's spelled with an E-T, salad. Some people just call it pokeweed. These berries, you can see like this group right here is already naturally dried. And you could just harvest that as is. You don't have to dry them out. They're already dried and ready for you. A lot of people will tell you, oh, they're poisonous, they're going to kill you. They're actually medicine. There again, we don't prescribe anything or claim to diagnose or treat anything, but I do know that the old timers from way back, most of them have already passed, told me rheumatoid arthritis, that's what they took. And they were a lot smarter than we are today, and they live to be ripe old ages and still get out there and do more physical things than we do. So I'm going to take their word for it. And they would take, as far as dosage, I was told you take one as you would a pill, chase it with water, you do that for a week, then another, then another. One lady was taking like 12 a day or whatever. There again, disclaimer, I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm just telling you what I was told by older people that taught me stuff. More commonly, another fact about the berries is they are a dye. Like if you squish them on your shirt, it's there forever. So it's a dye. It could be used as a paint or something like that. The leaves are edible. You want the younger leaves. Generally what we would do, I ate them in my youth at different times, and we would just take, it takes a lot of them, because when you cook them down, you start off with this huge pile of leaves. You think you really did something, and it ends up being a salad bowl by the time it's cooked down. You're going for your younger leaves, and you want to boil it in 3 changes of water. Bring it to a boil, pour off the water, add fresh water, and just repeat that 3 times. And we usually would season it with salt, maybe a little bit of pork. And it was a favorite, a staple in the South. A lot of people from the South are familiar with it and already know about cooking it. But it's another thing that's out there. Also the root, one of my friends who has passed, his name was Tony Muir. He was a medicine man. And he was making a drawing salve that would pull things out of the body. And one of the main ingredients was the heart of the poke root. He told me, get the heart of the poke root, like the center part. Scrape everything else away with your knife. To it, he would add cayenne pepper, olive oil, colloidal silver, and some other things. The exact recipe, sadly, died with him, as far as I know, because I never learned the whole thing, or I never had written it down, so I regret not doing that. But there again, another plant to think about, identify, do your own research, see how you're going to utilize it. Me personally, I have eaten it plenty, and I really like it as a cooked green. I think it's delicious. And there's some people that say if you eat a few messes of this every year, it gives you immunity to certain things. There again, I don't make any claims, but I think the old timers had it pretty dialed in. So there it is for your consideration. Hi gang, we're back. We were just bebopping along here and saw this beautiful specimen. This is known by a few different names. One of them is Self-Heal, also known as Hillall, and I think the Latin is Prunella vulgaris, or vulgaris. I don't know if it's a short A or a long A, but it has a very distinct purple flower with this elongated flower head, and when you look at them from underneath, they're just amazing. Very unique little flower. But this is one of the oldest documented plants used by human beings. I think the Greeks wrote about it extensively, used in their medicines. It has antiviral properties, along with just general health. You know, you can eat it, you can make it into a tea and drink it, you can tincture it. Just any way you can get it in you, it's thought to be good. Hence the name, Hillall. I mean, it's just one of these broad spectrum awesome things. Usually when I find it, I just like to eat the leaves. I don't know really how to describe the taste. It's kind of neutral, but it's also got a little bite to it, a little body. Almost like a hint of Swiss chard, maybe approaching kale-ish. Somewhere in there. Also, this thing feels like it has a squarish stem. At least has ridges on it. I'd have to get some glasses out and look at it a little more closely. But do some research on this plant. There's a vast history of this plant being used. And another thing, you know, when I find something growing, like you can see there's another one here, there's a few more down there, I try to never deplete any one area of any one thing. I may take a third of what's there and I leave the rest. And when possible, if the part of the plant that I need isn't the root, I'll cut it rather than pull the thing up and then let it come back. So just make sure that you're a good steward of what we have. So here we have not the best specimen of broadleaf plantain, but this is as we found it. These leaves are pretty amazing. This is the broadleaf. There's also a narrowleaf variety I don't see immediately available. But one of the remarkable things about the plantains, both narrow and broadleaf, is if we have something in the body that we want to draw out of the body, they're very astringent, they're very tightening, they're very pulling. So we chew this up and put it on the bite site or the sting site, let's say yellow jacket sting, bee sting, splinter, and even snake bite, that sort of thing. I did treat a young man with a copperhead bite using the plantain leaves. He was actually in the ER at the local hospital as I did this. All right, here we have a specimen of the narrowleaf plantain, and it looks nearly just like the broadleaf plantain as far as the vein structure goes. You'll have one vein down the middle and then usually two on each side. The only difference is this leaf is, as they call it, narrowleaf plantain, or a lanceolate leaf. It's more of an elongated leaf. Also edible, also very useful as drawing, tightening, pulling, astringent. It does all the things that the broadleaf does, but I almost feel like it's even more astringent because when I eat it raw, this one really pulls the water off the tongue. I've also heard of people making a tea out of this for blood pressure issues, which may be of use to you. And you'll notice on the bottom of this one, it starts to turn purplish and then almost a whitish color beyond that. And that's a characteristic that we find with both species at various stages of their growth. And as this one fully matures, it'll have a tall seed head on it. A lot of people that were raised in rural areas will remember folding that over and popping the seed head at each other. I remember doing that as a child, and later I learned about plants, and I'm like, wow, that was food and medicine, and we use it as a toy. So just wanted to show you that. Also a disturbed soil plant. It's going to grow in the same places that the broadleaf does. You're going to find it in your yard, along the edges of trails and roadways and things of that nature. So there you have it. We looked at a few plants, and keep in mind, we are just scratching the surface. I mean, we could study nothing but plants from now on. There's like 3,500 species of plants here, and if I just divorced myself from everything and studied nothing but that, I would never get it all done before I died. It's that deep of a topic. So we're just scratching the surface. Just wanted to throw a few things out there. Mainly just to get you to be motivated in your area to go out and learn what it is around you that you could utilize. Always look to what your ancestors did or the indigenous people in that area. That's going to be a really good indicator. You know, the plants here that we use, really we can trace it back to the Cherokee and the Creek nations is how that knowledge comes to us now. So wherever you're at, you know, look to the ancestors in that area and the First Nations people for kind of a guide to see how they live.
So guys, I hope you liked this video. If you did, feel free to hit the like button. If you got any questions with regards to some of the plants that we went over, feel free to leave them below. We'll definitely make sure that we hit up the comments. And until next time, be safe.